corporate finance, a project for Quantic. I did it by myself. There were three states, right? Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Texas. And a company that produced phones, made phones, was considering where to put the company, basically, where to put the production, in which three states. Um, so they're Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Texas. Um, so if we were to look at, so there's a lot of numbers, okay? Um, it's basically the amount of units. So 12 million is a lot if you make anything. If you make phones, it might be $400, right? This is basically nothing. Now you have plant, property, and equipment. Plant, property, and equipment, if you think about manufacturing, is more important than real estate, right? So factory fair squattage, price, certainly Amazon has factories. Does Apple have factories? I don't know. To be honest, I've seen a few Amazon factories in Ohio. Equipment, um, obviously you have to buy the metal, the chips, um, and so then there's taxes. So if we were to look quickly, just to get a basis, 3%, 21%, that sounds decent. So here there's a property tax, 3%, 21%. As far as I know, there's different income taxes and property taxes. That's why Tesla probably went there. Again, 3% and 21% in Texas. So if we go back to Pennsylvania, that's a lot of employees, right? That sounds about right when we think about mass layoffs. How many employees could, if we were to say Amazon or Google, have? Even Group M. Cost per employee, that's kind of a random variable, right? Cost of goods sold or like salespeople, with phone companies, if you look, T-Mobile, AT&T got crushed in the stock market today. Um, so is that important? Probably not. Not in terms of competitive. So this was one complaint I had, because the cost of capital is the debt to equity ratio. Basically, it's about 20%. Basically, you think the return on equity, the return on assets on production is going to be 20% with the financing. That's great. Um, it just seemed, it was the same, the way the professor um, did it was, it would be the same across all states, which is probably good. We're just trying to get an idea here, right? We're trying to do data entry. There's a lot of numbers, a lot of years. So this is a plan over 10 years, right? Some of these numbers are real or based off of real numbers. Um, so revenue is 8 billion, right? That's thousand, million, billion. So 8 trillion, right? Cost of goods sold, again, different states are going to have different cost of goods sold. So, you know, Pennsylvania's out. Pennsylvania's out because if you look at the results, the net present value is low. It's a loss. You wouldn't even pick this project. Let's say this was a project of like um, Gatorade vanilla, right? We wouldn't do it. We'd say no for any project that has an re, uh, internal rate of return under 100% should be zero. You should never do that. So Pennsylvania's out. That leaves North Carolina. So depreciation, I'll try to talk about quickly. Depreciation is the idea that your computer depreciates, right, in value. If you bought it for $1,000,000, well, $1,000, the next year it's 800, then it's 600, then it's 400, then it's 150, and that's not true, right? Some of the keys might fall off, but I understand the computer better. There's more assets on the computer. There's more software, so the actual value of the computer goes up. So depreciation's out. It's out. Taxes are constant. You add back the depreciation because it's like a whine, wah, wah, wah. But the main one is land. So for whatever reason, Texas is zero for the land, right? And this is 20 billion, right? 1,000. This is 100,000. So this is 20 million. My bad. 20 million. That sounds right. 800 million for the factory, right? If you think about, the idea of a conveyor belt, it's incredibly expensive, intricate, a lot of safety hazards, workman's comp, equipment. So the key thing to think about is that the actual land or even the real estate, right, as far as office space, isn't that important. And it's really driven home in the show The Office with Dan in real life, John Krasinski. He gets no credit. He's in Jason Bourne 4, with Dan Aykroyd's son. Jason Bourne 4 stars Jeremy Roenick. Jeremy Roenick is in Chutzpah about landmines, right? So working capital is complicated, but the idea is that this is 8.9. Net present value is a formula. It's a formula. Yeah, you plug in a formula into Excel. What would be great is if there was a net present value formula in an Excel. Microsoft does not know how to make new formulas, like personally, so they can't teach them. Um, Earnings is coming up on tomorrow. I would expect it to be fine. Excel is a great program. You know, XLS, there's CV, um, Gemini was added. Um, you know, there's cool stuff. Pivot tables, they still can't explain pivot tables. Um, one thing I'll give you is this. This girl, Valerie, this chick from Stowe, she taught me how to use it. So if you hit this, the whole format, boink, right? So if you now do this, don't hit print, boom. So it's tough. It's tough. So that wasn't clear. So if you want to do something like that, right, you might have to hover over it. And if you go to page special, you might be able to do well, it's tough. But the difference is values or format. So format worked. So don't forget the control Z. What's a zoo? Just throwing that out there. But 8.9 something 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 versus 8.85. So that's like the professor's pointing out that's an error where you just turn in the wrong thing. This just looks higher. Does that happen? And that's why, there's two kind of checks here for why aren't people getting fired. Right. Right. And one would be, did they accidentally go to Pennsylvania? You know, maybe it seemed less risky, right? Maybe that's risk. They read the whole thing wrong. If you look at Tesla today. So what are some of these planned obsolescence if everyone's not? If just from a continental philosophy. And that might be they just read it wrong because we're seeing a lot of literacy mistakes. I am personally. Um, so yeah, that's, kind of a good project, just to see how tough finance is and how boiled to its constituent part, it's really called data entry. It's called data entry. So if you know any jobs, you know, talk to Steve, talk to Steve. He'll get back to you.